some insights from our panelists on what they're seeing in their area and out there in the market. So Assal, please kick off for us and give us a bit of a view on your area.
Absolutely. So as I noted earlier, at Okta over 20-some months ago, we started on the journey of dynamic work. And dynamic work is really the ability to have the world as our talent pool and empowering our employees to work from anywhere. So when the pandemic hit and we went into shelter in place, which was a year ago now, time has flown by quite quickly, it really was a silver lining for us to accelerate this initiative. And it took a moment for us to realize that it is not a one size fits all. You can't say to every employee, you can work from anywhere, but there had to be a very thoughtful and purposeful analysis of every single position and how that worked into this new dynamic world. And we worked with the leaders within the organization and identified who could be fully dynamic, work from anywhere, partially dynamic, that they had to be tied within a region to support their business, or dynamic workplace, that their position had to be within the office. And that's about 3 to 5% of our overall employee population. But just defining those guidelines really helped employees understand what that meant. And then from there out, what we started to hear and see is we had a lot more key talent coming from regions that we never had tapped into before. And then when we look at our office, what we've identified is that you don't need one headquarters that needs to be large, but more of the hub and spoke model, which we had started before, but it's just now the current times enables us to accelerate that as well. And when we look at the physical office, which we are true believers is necessary as part of maintaining the culture of our company, really is about how do you design that space to be a space that, number one, is a healthy and healthy environment. And so we have dedicated and committed that any new physical office will be LEED Silver and WELL Silver 8. And with that, the key there with getting both certifications is not only are we looking at the overall infrastructure, but we're also focusing to our employees, which are key assets, and making sure that the environment that they come into the office is very healthy. And when we look at the office, it's not a one size fits all. What we need for our engineering site is not what we need for our GNA. And that's all about getting quantitative and qualitative feedback and data points to make informed decisions. Are we there yet? No. Do we have data points? Absolutely. So it's all about piloting it and then taking a pause, getting more feedback, and then evolving those designs as we move forward into the future.
That's great. No, there's some great points there. I think particularly that piece around the guidelines there, because everyone's world was turned upside down, people working remote. But as people come back to the office and come back into some form of hybrid workplace, there's going to be a whole new learning experience again, and those guidelines will be essential to make it work, won't they? We had a very interesting discussion with one of our clients recently, and they were speaking about how they've got assumptions layered on assumptions. And I think that's, everyone's finding that. So we've got to do that experimentation and, as you say, get those data points back in to guide us. That's excellent. Francis.
Totally agree. So speaking of the new normal, there is no playbook for this. Just like what Assal has mentioned, we do have those data points, and that's exactly what I've been doing the past couple of months, really reaching out to workplace professionals and trying to get their insights on what are you guys planning on doing? What are you currently doing? Just gathering information on the best practices that we could ever have, because we haven't really gone through, as workplace professionals, we haven't really gone through a pandemic, closing down the office, and then safely reopening the office. So looking at those data points, looking at the best practices as much as we can, and then implementing them into the office, but then having that information that we can quickly pivot and quickly adjust, and communicating to our employees that this is what our plans are for today, and it could really change tomorrow, next week, depending on what our government is doing, depending on what the information that we are getting. I love the fact that it's not one size fits all. Just like what Assal has mentioned, engineering team, marketing team, but also different companies. It could be a Facebook, Twitter, Salesforce, 100% work from home. It could be, another company that you're doing a 50% hybrid of work from home and, on-site, or it could be, a free for all, which is quite challenging for workplace professionals if we do free for all. So there's so many different options that we could look at. But the most important thing is really trying to make sure that we keep our employees safe, we keep our employees productive, and we keep our employees engaged as well. I'm glad that when Assal has built their company or built their offices, they reached out to having a dynamic workforce even before the pandemic. And I think that's what we wanted to do right now. We accelerate these planning to ensure that we can keep our employees engaged. And then by keeping them engaged, we keep them productive.
Yeah, that's good. And I think one of the great outcomes from this whole period is a whole mindset around change and experimentation. And the fact that there's a much greater acceptance that it's okay to try stuff out and it might not work. And we go into it knowing it might not work, but we're pushing the boundaries in view of coming out with something better. It's good. Andie, love to hear your insights.
So, one of the unique things about our role is that we are looking internally to our own organizations, and we are working towards a much more dynamic solution compared to working from the office as we were before. And I think that's trending with a lot of companies right now. But at the same time, we're seeing some of our clients, specifically in the government aspect of things, and also with some biotechs that we're working on, they have to be on site. Some of them have unions that have contractual regulations that say where and when space is provided for them. Other people also have to be in the lab to pull, work product for them, which is data samples and experimentation. So there is, as you said earlier, there is no one size fits all. It's very much dependent on your role and the type of work that you're doing. And what's really nice about the opportunity that, if you go back, I think it was Patton who said, never waste a good crisis. Using the opportunity, because all of a sudden going back to the office is going to be the new change, because what people experience right now in their baseline is working remote. So this is a great opportunity to really reset expectations around the office and what the office needs to be in the future, because you have this opportunity to start from a different base point instead of that's the way we've always done it, overriding the conversation. So we're seeing a lot of dynamic changes across the board. And as you said, it's a great time for experimentation. I said that architecture has always been an alpha, right? If you were to develop a widget or an iPhone or whatever, you have an alpha, beta, C, delta, and then you go to market. Well, architecture is always, because of its cost, an alpha product. And so this dynamic situation gives us a lot of different environments to really research and get a lot of great data points. Assal was talking about how do we learn through all this. So that's my input. Thank you.
Great. I love your thoughts there, and the thoughts from the others. One of the things that I'm interested in is the whole codifying of work modes, and whether somebody, different organizations have different ways of identifying. But what I'm actually wondering will maybe become the norm is that people won't necessarily be stuck in one mode. They won't necessarily always be, in an agile mode or in any other type of mode. It may depend on, the activities and the objectives that I've got today, this week, this month, this quarter. And there will be times when maybe, you are mainly office based because of the types of activities you're doing, the types of projects you're on. And then there are times when you may go to that much more dynamic or flexible. So I think we probably need to be careful about pigeonholing people into one or the other, because I think people will maybe, as personal circumstances or objectives change, or business. I don't know what you'd say around that, Assal, around the work you guys have done in kind of codifying the different work patterns you're seeing.
No, I think that's a great point, Alex. One key thing is, what is going to drive employees to come to the office? Everyone's going to have a different need as to why to come. Some may have not the perfect home situation with younger children, they're caring for elders, or even roommates. And then you have others that feel that when they come into the office, they could do their best work. So one of the key thing is, and I'm going to take Russell's comment here, I called it critical mass. He called it engineered serendipity. You need to create that engineered serendipity where when you come into the office, you're actually going to see people that you work with. So you can have those aha moments, you can collaborate with them. And so we have to create tools and inform employees how to best use those tools through change management so that they can have those collaborative opportunities when they come into the office. Because if I come into the office and there's only finance people, well, that's not going to really help me. So that's point one. Point two is you have to provide variety. So yes, we're going to address list desking. However, people still want to be tied to a purpose, a community, and each of the functions have their own community. And that's why we're going to be sticking with assigned neighborhoods. And so when you look at that, an engineering's assigned neighborhood will probably look a bit different than, the people operations group. And that's where we look at it from three types of categories within a neighborhood of what type of work points one should have. There's the traditional desking, there's the collaborative spaces, but then there's also focus spaces. You may come into the office just to have heads down space, but providing the tools at each of these three different work points is going to be key to allow people to do their best work. So just some thoughts there on that.
Yeah, and I love your use of the word tools. I think you've used that a couple of times, and it's interesting that we start to view the workplace as one of the tools at our disposal so that we can be productive. We can do the things that we need to do, right? What's your views on that, Andie?
Well, to the point of the workplace, I think what we're seeing is a mind shift from workplace to work platform. And the office just happens to be one of the solutions that you provide for that. And when you talk about the work platform, I think one of the things that's really important to understand, going back to your codifying of modes question, I think the question always starts with why. What is the driver? What's the purpose? And if you look at organizations today, the challenge is that they don't know what's 2 years in the future. What's the next 6 months? What's the next 2 years gonna hold? And you're asking them to sign 10 or 5-year leases. And so I think that there's going to be this acceleration. And if you talk to real estate executives, they said that there already has been acceleration for shorter lease terms and things like that. And from the office space being part of that work platform, that translates to us to have to provide a structure for you for increased flexibility. We were talking yesterday, and we talked about how EMEA has really been ahead of the game on this. They have, the raised floor, they have demountable partitions. They're doing a lot of solutions with furniture rather than with hardwall solutions, which allows companies to come in, rapidly renovate and make changes, and maybe design, their lobby area 10% or a 20% margin, and very quickly get up to speed for how they occupy that part of their work platform. And I think that you might see more of that throughout the United States because there's such a demand from organizations. It's really kind of thinking about it from a different perspective of how can we respond faster, quicker, better for our constituents.
I think it's a very interesting point, Liam, so you made as well around the different needs of people, the different drivers, why they come to the office. So we're actually going to have to dig in deeper to understand the motives. And Andie, you spoke about people voting with their feet yesterday, and how we've seen that example is actually going to be one of the challenges here is attraction back to the office, isn't it? How are we going to make it so people by choice come to the right place at the right time to help their teams and their organization?
Yeah, back to Assal's point of what will drive behaviors. You have to, if people have a platform instead of an office, and you are literally giving them, they have to have a reason to come in, and you're not just competing with other parts of the office. You're competing with Starbucks down the street. You're competing with our home office. You're competing with all these other things. So they are literally going to vote with their feet, and you're going to see what areas, and to Assal's point, when you get data on how people are using space coming out of COVID and coming out of this work from home experiment that we've been doing for the last year, then you're really going to see, I think, a high degree of what's working and what's not. And I think it's really going to be important for us to gather significant input at that point, because I think that we're kind of all reimagining what the future needs to be, and nobody really knows yet. Francis, I saw you go off mute there. I think you wanted to add in. Let me be quiet for a minute.
No, I was listening to you on companies being agile and being able to come in and transform their offices into what they need at the moment. You know, coming from a freshly built office from Honey, you know, we customize our build out to who we are as a company and how we work. So it's not much of an agile environment, because we wanted to ensure that what we built was for Honey. So we had, you know, structures in place. And now that we're coming into the reopening of the office in space planning, it's a little bit more difficult for us. The best analogy that I've gotten from all my conversation, as we talked about yesterday, is the country club mode. And I think Assal has you know, touched on this a little bit. You know, the office space is just part of the solution. And, you know, we may have all of the resources that we have in our home offices, but then there will always be that time that we needed to go somewhere else to pick up, you know, supplies, to print, to have our heads down, to collaborate with our coworkers. So we think about all the different things, and not just how to safely reopen the office, but what are the different perks and benefits that we can provide during the pandemic, during the hybrid situation? How are we cleaning? How are we handling mail? How are we handling you know, safety and security? There's so much to think about without having a playbook and without having, you know, specific tried and tested solutions, because we haven't really tried and tested anything yet.
Just to add on that, and sorry about this, Russell,
No, go ahead. Good.
over the past year, that has presented to the workplace organizations an opportunity to create hypotheses, and then to take that and platform it to piloting. And I understand some companies have the capital to do it and others don't, but there's an opportunity to take right now to then better inform us about how future spaces will look like, what resonates to employees. And so I just am a strong believer that over the past year, it's been a key opportunity for us to take a step back and start looking at the trends in the past and what we're hearing in the future, and then allowing us to create hypotheses and piloting them in one shape or form or another to better enable us to move forward to what we would call the new way of working.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this yesterday, that the whole area of post-occupancy data gathering is going to take on a whole new importance, isn't it? I suppose it won't necessarily be post-occupancy, it'll be an always-on data gathering piece. Alex, you were mentioning about hackability yesterday.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject that's come up more recently. We've seen it with many of our clients for a while, and I liked Andie's perpetual alpha analogy. It's interesting. I was just thinking in relation to that, and also what Assal was saying. The workplaces that we used to design and that we've been used to going into, and the offices that we've been used to going into, are based on a lot of, I guess, many years of evolution. And we've now got almost the opportunity, as you say, to wipe the slate clean, to refresh really the why of the office. you know, we don't have to design it this way because it's the way the other offices have been designed. We've actually got an opportunity of wiping that slate clean and saying, well, actually, why does the office exist now in 2021? Why does the office exist, and how can we best utilize that tool alongside all the other opportunities we've got, for people to collaborate or to work together or to work in an individual way. So yeah, I like this idea of kind of wiping the slate clean. That the old normal, kind of what it was different for every client, and in some ways I don't think there was an old normal that was the same for everyone, but I think everyone had something that we used to have, and it's different now. So it's an interesting, this point is a fascinating point for us in the workplace and interior design industry.
A great
but
question.
To that point, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go on, Andie. You go.
I was gonna say, to that point, we talked about this yesterday. You need to have a chassis. You need to have a set of standards for things to be reconfigured within, a set of parameters and rules, because if you're just recreating every single time, you are going to not to learn the hypothesis and prove the point, or learn the lesson, and it's going to be very cost prohibitive. So you've got to create a center stand of, a kit of parts, if you will, that has to be more encompassing than it used to be, in order for that to be effectively deployed through organizations. And so I think there's going to be a lot of questions about what systems do we provide and how flexible can we make those systems within those parameters. And I think that's going to be a real focus coming out of this, because we don't know what we don't know. Even when we get to the new office, 6 months down when we get everyone vaccinated, are we going to be exactly like we were before? I don't think so, because right now the expectation is working from home. So managing expectations is 180, and we are going to have a whole plethora of new tools in the virtual world that we didn't have before, and acceptance from a change management perspective of people working in a more virtual fashion. So it's really going to be a time of, to I think Russell's point earlier on, experimentation.
Yeah, and that segues nicely into a question that's just come in from Carol Ann, and for saying that for companies that have declared that they want to go 100% work from home, has there been any real discussion or insight on the impact of the lack of in-person impromptu collaboration? I'll throw that one out to the floor. That's an interesting question. Francis, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, definitely a great question. From the conversations that I've had with workplace professionals and leaders, I think we mentioned it yesterday also. We go into a meeting, it's for 1 hour, but then the pre-conversation and the post-conversations, those are sometimes where decisions are being made, or assignments are being made. So there is that fear of not being a part of those conversations because of the technology that we have, and because most people are working from home. There is also that issue of leaders seeing people that are coming into work being on site, and looking at them as they're working hard. The notion of that work, that they're working harder than the people working from home, and being comparing that from people that are coming to work on a daily basis. So again, there's not a lot of information that we have to make sure that we have that equality in the workplace, to ensure that people that are working on site and people that are working from home have that same opportunity to rise from the levels, and be able to produce an output that's good for the executive leadership.
Oh, that's good. And you spoke yesterday when we were talking about this, Assal, around equity and making sure, I think particularly in relation to those conversations that happen perhaps around a meeting. Give us your thoughts.
No, absolutely. I mean, just one thing that I've missed, and the team that I am very honored to work with always say, I miss a good old whiteboarding session, everyone.
Yeah.
The tools that we have in technology are great, but nothing takes away when you just are able to gather everybody and just get on a whiteboard and collaborate. And those are things that right now as workplace professionals, we may have ideas of how to solve it, but we don't know if that's actually the end all be all. So I think it's taking the different case scenarios of what kind of behaviors that would be impromptu, the meeting before the meeting, the cool down, the warm up, the whiteboarding session, those, aha moments where you bump into somebody in the hallway that prompts a conversation, creating those different scenarios and then journeys of what are the tools, technology tools, or other change management behaviors that we can provide to help people get to that end result. We don't know, but what we know is that there's a gap. And so we got to go get that data to make informed decisions and create that strategy.
Just to that point, Assal, and I guess everyone would be interested in the comments. There's a question here from Bill Callahan asking about the workplace management platforms and how they can form part of a reopening or a back to the office plan, and then how the data that we're able to gather, and the occupancy data and the sensors, how that can be weaved into this ongoing, adaptation, hackability, whatever you like to call it, but evolution of the workplace. Because as we've said, we're making, professionals are making informed choices and informed assumptions around what we think will be needed in the workplace in the future, but we have to test that, and that may need to change and evolve. Andie, I see you've unmuted. Go ahead.
Every single client who is looking at doing a work from home or a hybrid solution, one or the other, is really leveraging a lot of those. Why bring people in? If you are 100% work from home, then what are the metrics that you're going to use? And the smarter answer is use what you already have. You can use Microsoft Analytics to say how often people are on the different software tools in your computer. That might be a little bit big brother for some companies to really do. And there's a whole, I think, conversation is going to happen around privacy rights in relationship to that. I know in Europe, they have the laws to regulate some of that to make sure everything's blinded. And California has done as well. I think you're going to see more of that roll out throughout the country. But if you're talking about a hybrid solution, every single one of them is doing reservation systems at a minimum, and those reservation systems are going to be validated with check-ins. And that's a risk issue just as much as it is an operational management issue, because they want to understand contract tracing and things like that. So depending on what your solution is, again, there is no one size fits all. But if you are 100% work from home, I think, there's going to be monitoring in some form. Just even if it's like your business monitoring for Jacobs, our CEO, if you ask him whether we've been successful in COVID, he would say yes, because we hit our numbers. So is that the metric that you look at? I don't know. That's going to change for each company.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What are the data points that actually say it was successful or not? It's different for each company, and I guess we might have to broaden out what some of those metrics are as well compared to what we looked at in the past. It's one of the questions that's come in from Tony Healy, and saying, as we get the back to workplace roadmap, what do you think the impact of work from home is going to be on people's behaviours, and will it empower individuals more? That's got an interesting question. Assal, give us your thoughts there.
Sure. I'll start off by kind of tagging along some of the conversation that we just had with Tony's question. One of the things that we have to also be mindful of is a lot of people are still being hired in the industry but may have never walked into a physical office. How do you provide them that connectivity? And so I think that's one of the behaviors that we have to be mindful of. How are we going to give them that same experience, that equitability, that there's no differentiation from you, employee who is working dynamically versus the other employee who's going to be physically in the office? You want everyone to feel that they're on the same platform. So we're looking at a variety of things. Equitability is one, Russell, that you noted earlier from our conversation. So whether you're in the office or not, a simple thing is having the same set of furniture and technology peripherals available to you. So we've actually created a work from home store specific to our Octonauts. And anyone can go in there that's an employee and purchase the same sit to stand electric desk, ergonomic chairs, the devices from a camera to a speaker to enable them to do their best work. And it's based around the value of trust within our organization. We trust that you make the best decision on what you need from this store. So we've created that seamless journey for them, as opposed to trying to figure out what type of desk I want, what type of monitor do I need. We've made it a one-stop shop. And in some cases in the regions, we have it as a white glove delivery service to their door. So just providing that small little tool goes a long way.
And I want to chime in also on that one. In terms of engagement on our end, the workplace team or the culture team are not solely responsible for creating these scenarios where we can have employee engagement. We also empowered our employee resource groups to provide that level of engagement on a really focused group of audience. So this way, the workplace team isn't just providing virtual events or virtual engagement scenarios that are generally for the entire population. We wanted to ensure that our employee resource groups are able to come up with specific events that are geared towards, for example, our employee resource group, Pride at Honey, Asians at Honey, or just specific events to give the employees the optionality of joining one event after another. This way, we continuously increase that engagement level for the different sectors of the employees in the company.
Yeah, it's interesting the point that was made earlier around onboarding and engagement of people who've never worked in an office before. And I think, I was just thinking, if we took ourselves, just the group of the 5 of us, as a microcosm of that, we've never met physically. And we've had some great conversations online, but when you've got that mix of some people who have been working together physically previously, others who are just joining digitally, you've got that mismatch, and it's that equality you're talking about earlier, really, Assal, isn't it? The relationships that you can kind of develop with your co-workers in those before meeting discussions, after meeting discussions, that you don't get quite the same in an online meeting. Online meetings tend to be, it's a bit more focused. You've got 55 minutes, you've got the conversation, and then you jump off and you move on.
Absolutely. I just have to add something. There was a very interesting conversation that I was having with some peers earlier this week. And, I started at Okta and I was only in the physical office for 4 months before we went to shelter in place. And I met my great coworkers and peers, but I have to say the relationships that were built during the shelter in place over the past year have become so much stronger. And it was a leader who posed, well, why do you think that's the case? And I said, when I look back and reflect on it, is it because when we saw each other in the office, it was just a hello and we just had our focus time and would go to our meetings, not really engage as much. And now that we're all in the same situation where we're wanting and desiring those conversations, we're all making extra effort. And the relationships that we've built over the past year, I have to say, in my opinion, based on my experience, has been a lot stronger. And so, but you don't want it to feel forced. So how do you find that balance of creating those strong relationships without having it forced all the time where I have to talk to them, I want to check in on them? But there's a human innate behavior where you desire more of that discussion when you're sitting behind a computer all day.
That's really interesting. Sorry, go on, Andie.
I was going to say, if I can chime in, one of the things I find interesting, if you refer to Ben Weber's work, he's CEO of Humanize, which is an organization that kind of looks at how people tracking sensors, things like that. And he's written a couple of really great articles for HBR. And his research has found that if you had a pre-existing relationship with somebody through COVID, those primary relationships have gotten so much stronger, exactly to your point. However, your secondary and your tertiary relationships have gotten that much weaker because you're not running into people at the coffee bar anymore and things like that. So you only have so much bandwidth, right? And so do you focus in and make it stronger here? Well, then this becomes weaker. And so things like visibility in the office and things like that, they still have really high value. And some other people I was talking with, they talked about, how does your company develop a digital culture? Because we're all working digitally, and that's going to move forward beyond just, you know, where we're at right now. When we do come back to the office, the digital footprint is going to be just as important as the physical face-to-face footprint. And how do you, to your point earlier, Alex, how do you have equity? And I think there will be technology tools that allow for that. I think we've all gotten a lot more sensitive to it. So for example, I don't know if this is true yet, but I've heard that there is, I don't know if it's Teams or Microsoft or who it is, or Zoom, but if you're in a meeting room, every single person will have their own chiplet, just like you do in these virtual environments, so that there's not one area that has a higher priority. Everyone still has the same level of equity on the screen, if that makes sense, for your interactions. And I think that there's a lot of tools that are out there, and I don't pretend to be an expert in that, but I think we're all going to learn in the next 6 months to a year how much this demand has created an opportunity in the technology aspect for us to work in different ways. You know, how far is virtual reality really going to play in the future? Are we all just gonna, and this is future casting, are we gonna put on visors and we're gonna have a virtual world around us, and we all have to have our own little pod in the home so that we can actually engage in the virtual world? And again, that's really out there, but it's not unimaginable. And I'm curious to see what technology will be in the next year.
I agree so much with both of you. And speaking with Assal saying that we're creating that extra effort to create that relationships. I think one of the newest launch social media platform, Clubhouse, you know, these are all mostly strangers coming together, coming into a room, getting to know each other, talking about a specific topic. And, you know, there's more effort to create that relationship, to get to know each other and to, you know, pursue that common passion. And thereby, you know, becoming friends because of that platform. You know, these are strangers who haven't really seen each other, but because of that common denominator of, you know, what's important to them, they create that relationship and they build that friendship amongst each other, thereby creating that, you know, one level of commonality for everyone.
Yeah, it's I think one thing's for sure, all of us have got the things that we really miss about all being in the office together, and this whole time has crystallized what we value. To your point, Assal, about you know, relationships getting deeper. We're acutely conscious, aren't we, of what we're missing in that area, and it, as you say, it makes extra effort go in. That's good. There's an interesting question here from Bill Keller, but asking about the impact, the financial impact on real estate of the future work environment. And it's a question that's been looked at, and there's been lots of discussion lines around this, but, you know, are those costs going to go down or are they going to go up?
So my thought overall is that, I mean, just like yesterday, there was an article about JP Morgan Chase and how they're releasing a lot of space in downtown Manhattan, and also some place in Midtown. I think that companies are going to be repositioning. And I think there's not just, it's going to have a domino. And I think what people are not realizing is the domino is going to translate to the residential environment. I mean, how many people have bought desks since they've gone into the pandemic mode? How many people have bought additional monitors? Assal, your company supports that internally, but not every company does. So I think that you're seeing a big transfer from what is traditionally a central business district to more of a residential impact. And I don't think it's going to be everybody. I think there's going to be some that are going to potentially increase their footprint. If you're talking about people who have to be on site by government contract or by other things. So they're going to want more space because they want to have more social distancing within the office, more generous work areas. I think we've gotten too efficient, quite honestly, when we were starting to disrupt building capacity by elevator usage and bathrooms and things like that, and over capacity for what the building can provide. We were really pushing the envelope there. And I think this is kind of right-sized us back to a more average ratio. However, there is probably going to be some transfer, I think, of facilities. And I've heard of it, especially in other areas, say out in Jersey, where they're transitioning office properties to logistical properties and or potentially, you know, can they change it to labs? Because health science is one of those things that require people, life science requires people to come on site. So there's a big market opportunity and demand for, and if you look at the demographics of the baby boomers, that also reinforces the demand that's going to be in the future. So I think you're going to see transfer. I don't know if it's overwhelming transfer, but I think it's going to be directional, yes.
Again, maybe it's another example, as we're saying, are people kind of wiping the slate clean and saying, why do we need real estate and what do we need it for? And as you say, there are some elements where people might say we don't need as much or all the real estate or some of the real estate that we had, or maybe repurposing what they do have for a different purpose. And it comes back to that, the why of the office. You know, why does the office exist? And I'm interested in really exploring that, you know, in a deep way, because beyond all the gimmicks and you know, the ping pong tables and whatever else that have you know, people don't come into the office for that, but there's so much more on a deeper level around the connections and the culture that the workplace brings.
Mm-hmm. With some of the companies that I've been consulting with in the past couple of months, it's not just the work from home, but I've also heard about the work near home. So speaking of adding real estate to the company's portfolio, we're having this one big headquarters located, you know, in a specific location. But then because of the work from home aspect that employees have been accustomed to, having to provide a satellite location, having to provide a hub that is work near home to limit, you know, commute, to be able to get into an office that is branded, that has the perks and benefits and amenities that our offices are having. We provide this work near home satellite offices that people can go into, you know, get their supplies, get their, you know, heads down, focus, but not entirely going back into the office where everyone else might be going into. So there still might be that expansion in real estate that we're looking at.
So are we going to see that there's perhaps the grade A office that was typically concentrated in the city centres? We're going to see that coming out into the suburbs because there'll be a higher demand for that work near home, as you call it. I think that's a great way of putting it. You mentioned that, Assal, in your plans. Any more to say around that point of those offices out?
We're gonna make informed decisions. You know, Okta has made very informed decisions to date, and that's why we're not in a position where we have to shed real estate. So that's kudos to leadership there. And then moving forward, we are looking to expand. You know, there's a lot of regions with new workers that are part of Okta's dynamic workforce that we will go in open spaces. Are they going to be the 30, 40,000 square foot spaces that typically would have been built? No, they're going to be a reduced footprint, and it's going to be a destination that will allow people to have the choice to come in, you know, 1 to 3 days a week, however they deem appropriate. But I think there's also something that we've been looking for, and you may have been reading about it, is our experience centers. Taking the opportunity in the current real estate market where you would have retail space and transforming that into an Okta space that is not only for our employees to work from, but also a place where we can bring in our customers. And so that's something that we're looking into given the current climate of the retail market.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and a really good question just coming here from Nick saying, has the crisis made us really think more about the cost to convene, i.e. bring people together physically? There's so many things we just did before because it's the way we always did them, but will we think a lot deeper now about travel costs, IT costs, real estate costs when we're considering the choices that we have? And can Zoom or these other platforms get good enough to give us a really good experience to compensate? We set them up well. What do you think to that one, Francis?
Just as in the beginning of the call, I referenced that this panel would have been an in-person and all of the panelists would be side by side. And I mentioned that getting that energy from the audience. I don't think there is that comparison between however great a technology is. I think having an in-person meeting, in-person event would be great. But because of the learnings that we've had during the shelter in place in quarantining, we did learn so much that there is that optionality that we are able to do a virtual meeting, a virtual event, a virtual conference, and it could be as successful as it can be with a physical and on-site event. But I personally think that there is still that special energy that we get from having live events and in-person conversation, in-person that water cooler conversation, that exchanging of business cards, exchanging of information in person. So learnings are great and options are great because we give them a lot more ways of doing things rather than the traditional or rather than the old normal as we've been saying.
And I guess we'll be more thoughtful around the types of conversations we're having, because there are some times when a video meeting is great rather than everyone having to travel to a particular destination like we used to. And there are some times, as you say, actually you don't get the same level of energy or engagement or the like Assal was saying, those whiteboard moments. There are times when you can't beat a good old face-to-face meeting.
Well, and it's also about how do you develop trust with people over time, and really looking somebody in the eye is the best way to do that. And I think the most effective companies who will be virtual in the future are the ones that do bring their employees together for touch points at the minimum, at least once or twice a year. I used to work for a company that was global, and they would bring us together once a year to establish those relationships. I mean, yes, you need to figure out if you can share dog stories or a pint or whatever that needs to be for you to bond with them. And then after you do that, you have a better trust factor for creating the more virtual connection. You can do that much more easily and seamlessly. So I think that it's got to be a little bit of both, and there's still going to be a need, I think, to engage to a certain degree, always face-to-face, even if it's just for a touch point.
Great. No, there's been some great insights today, and we're coming to the end of our time. It'd be great just to hear from the three of you your rounding up thoughts from the discussions that we've had today. I think there's been some interesting lines that have come out, and one thing that stood out to me is that this increased level of awareness we all have around the choices and the impact of those choices, which we perhaps didn't see in quite the same way before. But have you got some closing thoughts for us, Assal?
I would love to have this conversation a year from now and reflect upon, what we've learned and where we are. So, the ideation has to continue, the innovation within our spaces and in the virtual world has to continue, but we also have to always remember to pause and reflect, because that's where we're going to learn our best lessons so that we can improve and enhance the future of our workplaces, both virtually and in the physical. So thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.
No, thank you, Assal. I think that's a great idea. We'll have to put that in the diary for March 2022. Francis, give us your closing thoughts.
there might be there might not be this new normal, but a couple of things that resonated with me is we learned how to be flexible, and we learned how to pivot depending on the situation. There's so much learnings. There's no one size fits all. We need to be able to listen to our employees. We need to be able to listen to what's happening around the world in order to create that informed decision. And lastly, apart from the millions of details that we're thinking about as workplace professionals, I'm always going to push to not forget the employee engagement and the employee experience. So we may have, perfected the safely reopening the office. And it is a priority that we give the safety and security and health and safety of the employees, but also keeping in mind that we need to make sure that employees are engaged and employees are happy within their environment. So thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Francis. That's great. And Andie, give us your closing thoughts.
My closing thoughts are, isn't this a great time to be in our industry? When else in our profession have we had a chance to impact people's lives at such a great scale? And the experimentation and the new innovation and thought leadership that's coming out right now is just amazing, and it's such an honor to be part of it, to really help organizations create value for their employees, to Francis's point. And so thank you, Space Dirt, for bringing us all together and sharing this with the community at large.
Thanks, Andie. No, that's great. And I fully, wholeheartedly agree. It's a really exciting time to be involved, and we'll very much look forward to having this discussion around a physical table maybe this time next year. But no, thank you, Assal, Francis, and Andie, for your insights. They've been really thought-provoking and certainly opened up some interesting lines there. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today and for the questions. I'm sorry we haven't quite managed to get to everyone's questions. Very much appreciate your participation. And if you enjoyed it today, please register for our next webinar on April the 8th. There's a link in the chat, and we'll also send out via email and other forms nearer the time. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Mm-hmm.